Well, hello. It is time for another episode on the Webinar Talk Show. My name is Tom Singer.
And my name is Liz Green. And this season, our third season, our theme is communicating your value. I know, I think I say it every time that we have an amazing guest, which I think is probably because every time we have amazing guests. But this one we've been waiting for a while. We are so excited to have our guest here today.
Oh, we are. And I will tell you, Judson Laipply is one of my favorite people in the entire speaking industry. Not just because he's fun, he's entertaining, but also because he's genuinely a really nice guy. I just have never seen him do anything schlocky to other people. So it's
No
always
schlocky.
fun. No schlocky. It's always fun to have really cool people here. So the thing about Judson is, like Eliz and myself, he gets paid to talk, which unto itself is kind of a cool profession to be in. But what he does is he provides a unique combination of entertainment, education, comedy, and content. And he does that because he also happens to be an entertainer, and he is one of the first people, in fact, maybe the first person to ever have a video go viral on YouTube. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. One of the first or the first person to ever have a video go viral on YouTube. And my guess is that if you're over 15 years old, you have seen the evolution of dance. And
Indeed.
Judson Laipply is the man behind the evolution of dance. Hey, Judson, welcome to the Webinar Talk Show.
Why, thank you so very much. Good to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And in fact, today we're going to talk a little bit about how to have a memorable message and how to have that message go viral. And you know a lot about that because you've lived that. So let's start off with that. Tell us a little bit about the history of your video that went viral.
Sure. So, like anything in life, there are things that you can plan for, there are things you can prepare for, and then sometimes there are things that just happen. And in my circumstance, nobody can plan to go viral, at least in the early days. Now everybody wants to go viral. When my video went viral, it was 2006. The idea of something going viral didn't even exist yet. So long story short, I started speaking back in the late 90s, 1999, early 2000. A very good mentor of mine said, you have to do something that nobody else does. When we talk about being memorable in any aspect when you deliver a message, you have to have something that attaches you to your message, because people won't remember everything you say. They won't remember everything that you did on stage, but you want them to remember at least one thing so that you can be that person. We, in the speaking industry, we call it the signature story, or that perfect framework, or model, or something that is unique and authentic to you. And so that gets to be your thing. And I was trying really hard in my early days to figure out what that was, and exploring, and I tried all sorts of different things. And one day I came up with this idea, because one of my early premises is just dealing with change and understanding change. I wanted to demonstrate how everything in life changes, and that's not necessarily good nor bad. That's just the way things are. And I came up with this idea to put together a dance montage, or a dance medley of all the popular songs that have very specific popular dances to go along with it. And so I kind of got excited. I wrote down the name, The Evolution of Dance. I wrote down the first 12 songs. I learned how to mix music. I went out and I started performing it. Went over very, very well. And I remember thinking, okay, this is my thing. I'm going to work on this. And over the next 5 to 6 years, I kept working on it and growing it and tweaking it and perfecting it. And then in 2006, I uploaded a video of that to the site at the time that I had just found called YouTube, because YouTube gave you an embedding code that let you copy and paste that embedding code into a MySpace profile. So my original intent was to put the video in my MySpace profile. So for those of you that are under the age of 20, MySpace was one of the first places where you could go and kind of have this social media gathering site where you could share information. And the reason MySpace was popular was because you could completely and totally craft your own looking page. It allowed you to customize things. Whereas when Facebook was first started, and still to this day, you couldn't change your page.
Right.
So I uploaded it to YouTube, and then luckily for me, someone somewhere saw it, liked it, threw it in an email with a link to back to it, and then just kind of snowballed from itself from there. So when people say, okay, so how do you claim to be one of the first? I was fortunate that I had the most watched video for almost 3 full years until Justin Bieber hit puberty, of course. And which it's a funny joke, but it's 100% true because his video was the one that eventually, went to number 1. And my video was the first video ever to hit 100 million views. So that's kind of at least that benchmark. I get to say that was, no one will ever be able to beat that quote unquote benchmark.
Right.
Sure.
So what that sounds like is that you were an overnight sensation, except overnight took about 7 years.
Correct. Like everyone, and even sensation, and that's one of the things when you look at the world of viral, it's so easy for us to believe that having something go viral will be the answer to all your questions. It will be the end of everything. Like, oh my gosh, if I can just go viral once, then it's all uphill from there. And the hard part is that's really, it never hurts. It rarely hurts. I should say it rarely hurts because we all know people who have gone viral for the wrong reasons. It rarely hurts from a career standpoint, but it's not going to be the answer. It's not going to be okay, I finally made it because business is so good now because of this one tiny thing that happened.
But it doesn't hurt.
No, not in the slightest at all. It does not hurt whatsoever.
Well, because we are still talking about it 15 years later when we introduce you onto the show. But you have done so much more than just some really cool dance moves over the years. And I really want to talk about this whole idea of how do people make their message memorable? I mean, that's what accidentally led you to YouTube fame. But how do just the regular company, the regular person trying to build their career, what are some things they can do to be memorable?
Sure. And I think it kind of, if you look at what the human brain does and how things become memorable, there are certain things that we can extrapolate from a lot of the things that have gone viral in the past or the things that have become memorable. Number one, in order to truly be memorable, you have to have some sort of an emotional connection. Period. The emotional brain is 6 times stronger than the cognitive brain, which basically means the way our brain stores memories, if there's an emotion that goes along with it, it's 6 times more likely to go from short-term memory to long-term memory. If you ask anyone what are some of their most memorable moments in life, it's always going to be something that's an emotional high or an emotional low. It's never going to be, well, I really remember my commute. Because that's an emotional thing. I'm going to remember this one day. Now, it might be, well, I remember once when I was on my commute and I got into a car accident, because that's an extremely high emotional experience. So figuring out some way to connect to people emotionally, and that a lot depends on who you are and what your story is and what your message is. A lot of messages, especially from a skill and technical standpoint, aren't emotional. So that's where the story framework comes in very important in order to attach a story to go along with that. We look at Super Bowl commercials. We're doing this a couple weeks before the Super Bowl, and the best Super Bowl commercials every year in and year out, are either the ones that are really, really funny, which is an emotion, laughter is an emotion, or the ones that really, really, that heartstraight one, when that's the puppy and the horse, and everybody's like, they got back together years later. That's a good story.
So Judson, you bring up a really interesting point there, and I don't want to let it just breeze by. And that is, you said comedy, laughter is an emotion. We talk so much in the speaking business about being interactive, and we want all our speakers to have some sort of an active activity. And you have a background in stand-up comedy and improv, and I've done a little bit of that. And one thing I try to remind people is that laughter is interaction, right?
Absolutely. What happens in, when we think about emotions, we live in the information age. You could spend your entire career studying a single emotion, let alone all of the emotions, and getting and really drilling down. But basically, when we talk about emotion from a brain standpoint, it's just a change in neurological pathways, a change in neurological workings, something that happens inside your brain. I used to do this one thing when I would be in an audience. It doesn't work very well virtually, but I would talk about the difference between a cognitive reaction and an emotional reaction. And an emotional reaction is something that happens without your consent, so to say. It just happens. You don't control it. You don't predict it. And I would always get real quiet, and I would just wait a second or two, and then I would just scream real loud into the and you would see everybody go like this. And, then they would be like, but that's the idea of an emotional reaction. You went from one type of brain to a different type of brain. So laughter is exactly that. I mean, anytime somebody laughs and chuckles, their brain is changing neurological patterns and electrical activity in that. And so that's the idea when you're trying to craft a message. You have to find ways to change the neurological. I had a great mentor early on in my career, somebody who had been in the comedy world. He lived out in San Francisco, this guy named Jimmy Kay. And I had gotten a showcase, and I was still early, and I was really working on combining comedy and content, because at that time there were very few people doing both. The only people that were really doing it were comedians who didn't quite make it and found out that they could try to become a speaker, but didn't really have a good message. And so I asked him to watch my show, and I was a 20-minute showcase. He came back later and he said, great job. He goes, are you open to some notes? And I said, absolutely. And he showed me this graph, and it went up and it went straight across. And he goes, this is your emotional bandwidth. Because when I first got started, like I was like 100 miles an hour, just like whoop, like in your head, like that whole time. And he said, a well-crafted set in the comedy world, a well-crafted show, the emotional aspect, or you could even call it the neurological changes, go up and down, up and down, up and down. That, if you were to just measure that, it should go up and down, just like it doesn't go down and stay all the way there, like that monotonous, Ben Stein and Ferris Bueller, and it doesn't go all the way up to the Robin Williams at 100 miles an hour, that becomes exhausting. And that was really eye-opening for me from a stage presence to get comfortable. And it took practice and it took work to craft those messages. And we hate to think that in a 60-minute presentation or whatever your message is that you have some filler, that there actually is some unimportant stuff in there, but that stuff is necessary in order for the audience to almost reset. Tom, when you've done your stand-up, you probably see, you always love when somebody tells a part of a story that there's no need for it at all whatsoever. But it's smart because that's letting the audience relax a little bit in order to go down, to come back up.
Well, and in terms of messaging, what that brings to mind is if all of your messaging is always the same format, and even in email messaging, we have our cute little template, and we're just like, there you go, there you go, there you go. And if you're not changing it up, why is anybody paying attention? But I wanted to go back because you said memorable messages. Our first thing to consider was the emotional connection. What else should we be considering?
So the two that kind of go hand in hand are consumable and shareable. In today's world, you have to figure out a way to create your message so that it's easily consumable and somehow in some way or another it's easily shareable. The brilliance and the fortunate for me of having a viral video on YouTube wasn't that I uploaded a video to YouTube. The brilliance of what YouTube was is it allowed people to copy and paste a link. And at the time in 2006, a lot of people were still sending email newsletters, meaning your aunt or your uncle or somebody inside the office was that person that once a week said, oh, here are the 5 cool stories, or, you would get links to videos. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. So you need to go where the messages are shared. If you're trying to share your message, you need to figure out how to make it consumable and shareable, and then go. Think about all the time, like there's a local photographer that I'm friends with here. They shot our wedding, and they do a contest every year where they pick one picture from everyone that they shot, and they do a picture of the year. And they ask, go tell your friends, go get. However, in order to vote, you have to go to their page, you have to like their Facebook page. And now I get it. They're doing it because they want to build their audience, and I'm fine with that. But one of the things we all know is how often do we not do something because there's that one extra step in there?
All the time.
How many times has somebody said, hey, will you donate to this charity? And you go, sure, great. Let me click a button. Oh, you need me to input my credit card information, and I need to sign up, and I need to put an email. Well, you know what? It's not that important to me. So that idea of making whatever it is you want to spread, the easier it is to share, the higher chance you're going to have of something going viral.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. I like what you said about what I interpreted was don't put too many steps into the process.
Absolutely. Don't put too many steps. Don't convolute your message. We want to try to craft these things that are so amazing, but the most effective messages almost throughout all of time are simple and easy to consume, like just easy to understand, parables and cliches and marketing messages, they all try to whittle it down so that whatever it is that you're trying to convey across, it's easy for people to get.
So Judson, one of the things that you talk about when you work with clients as a speaker and a trainer is you talk about, and I'm paraphrasing here, sort of the comparison between leadership or a good leader and how a video goes viral. So what is the connection between good leadership and the way maybe a video or some other piece of content goes viral?
So it goes back to some of the same thing, the role of leader and being a leader inside any organization, whether you have the title, to pull from our good friend Mark Sanborn, whether you have the title of a leader or not, is oftentimes to spread a message to create change. You're ultimately trying to create change of some sort. Now, every once in a while, you've got an organization that's well run and you're just trying to keep things going at the level that they're going. But most of the time when people get into leadership roles, they want to create change. And the way that you create change is fundamentally altering the input that people are getting on a consistent basis, which means you need to figure out how to craft your message. So number one, it's the same thing as before. Got to have an emotional connection. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be some sort of emotion attached to it, consumable and shareable. And then I think the other biggest factor that is both key in things that go viral and what makes good leaders is authenticity. One of the reasons cat videos and dog videos are so popular is because they are 100% authentic. No one ever is like, oh my gosh, is that dog really acting that way? Like, are they just thinking that?
That cat obviously is putting that on.
Exactly. Same thing with little kids. Babies are the perfect emotional palette because they never fake. Babies don't fake their emotions. Now they might learn some behavior over time that if I react in a certain way, I get that. So they're always learning. But early on, especially when they're angry and sad, they cry. When they're hungry, they cry. When they're happy, they giggle. And that, over time, we become better at masking our emotions and changing our behavior. But when you want to be an effective leader, when you want to have a good message, the more authentic it is to you, the better chance that is of continuing to carry on. Because we all know people who have tried to spread something that isn't aligned with who they are. And that very rarely works in the long run. It might work in the short time. You might be able to convince people for a year, a couple years, maybe even longer. But in the long run, the higher that level of authenticity is, the higher chance it has to remain and continue to spread.
Kind of reminds me of what Tom and I have been saying through our experiences, especially over the last almost year now, that heart will win out every single time over any sort of gee whiz wow, look at that cool thing that they can do on their virtual platform, whatever. It is that connection of actually in virtual looking like it feels like they're looking into your soul and talking to your heart happens on in-person events as well. But let's turn the page just for a second, because a big part of the people who watch this show are in the meetings industry, and they are struggling to convey why you should be a member of an association, why you should attend an event. What can they take away from this idea of really creating memorable messaging? Because you said you have to alter the input people get. What do we need to do differently to get people engaged?
Well, I think one of the first steps, especially with the association world, is really figuring out what are the true values that you provide as an association. Right now is such a hard time because everyone's got different experiences going on and everyone has different levels. A lot of the people that we know through the speaking world and the meetings world is really struggling with all of this change because there's the level of uncertainty is exceeded far beyond anything we've ever experienced before. We all accept the fact that there's an inherent level of uncertainty, but we also were used to kind of a normalized expectation of what the future held.
Right.
And right now, that particular aspect is just completely and totally gone. And so if the association really takes a moment to step back and figure out what are the benefits that we're providing as an association, answering that question first, and then figuring out how do we convey those through stories, through messaging, because I also feel that there'll be a lot of associations that when they try to answer that question, they're going to have a hard time answering that question now. A large part of what they did provide initially was the meeting space and the opportunity for networking and the opportunity for communicating with vendors. And I mean, every association is different, so some won't have any problems. And so they have to figure out how can we still provide that value, and then we craft the messaging around the fact that we're still providing that value. You know, we kind of went from the first 6 months of, okay, everybody, we just got to hold on. Like we just got to hold on and get through this 6 months. Then about the 6-month mark, we were like, all right, crap. So this isn't going to be an 8-second ride and ding, the bell goes off when you get on. Like we're riding a bull for longer than anyone's ever ridden this before in their life. And that's been the scariest part of all this is coming to grips with that and then going, okay, what can we continue to do to provide that value to our members so that members feel that they're getting the value that they were getting before, even if it's not in the same aspect.
So do you think that this world of much of our communication now being shifted to virtual, there was already a lot of virtual communication, but we still had the ability to go to that concert, to go have coffee, to go to, to meet up with a group of friends. Now that most of our communication has gone virtual, do you think people are having more trouble or less trouble openly communicating and getting those messages across?
I think it's a mixture. And the reason I think it's a mixture is I think we're getting better with verbal articulation of messaging. Meaning when you're in a virtual setting, you don't have the ability to gauge some of the nonverbal aspects that you would if you had in-person interaction. So therefore, we're required to use more verbal communication. So it might take some more time to get our messaging across. Whereas in that same breath, that means I feel that we're going to, when we do come back to more interpersonal communication and being around people, maybe that will be hurt a little bit. So I think what we're getting better at just using our words better and clarifying with our words. But I think we're probably getting hurt a little more on our ability to also convey via nonverbal cues. And I also think we forget how much that physical presence benefits us.
Yes.
Just as human beings, from at least me personally. I know everyone's a little bit different. Some people, social distancing is hopefully here to stay for the rest of their life. And
right.
For some of us, we're like, oh my gosh, this is much more difficult. And so for someone like me, being around people and being in the physical presence of other people gives me energy. So communicating via virtual drains my energy faster than if I was around people. So it's kind of a mix. I think we're getting better at some aspects of it. I think, but I also think we're hurting on some of the maybe non-obvious aspects of it, the social and the spiritual and the emotional and the mental aspect. Whereas the verbiage itself, I feel people are actually getting a little bit better at.
I knew this was going to be a good episode.
Well, of course, anytime you hang out with Judson, it's a good thing.
Right. Indeed it is. So, Judson, as we're getting close to the end of our time together, if you had a little advice for our meeting industry partners who are feeling a little weary of, as you said, the bull ride that is just continuing to go on and are hanging on, what kind of message would you like to send to them?
Well, there's several, I guess, kind of wrapped up. Is first and foremost, you have to do what you have to do whenever you have to do it. I mean, there is, you know,
that right there is going to go viral.
I'm writing it down.
Let's clip that and make a video meme of Judson. You have to do what you have to do when you have to do it.
You know, and that was hard. You know, that was, I think, hard for everybody because there's so many factors that go into it. There's a financial factor. There's the passion factor. There's the health factor. You know, if you or someone in your household is at a higher risk or long-term effects, maybe you can't go pick up a job at Instacart for the next 6 months in order to make, you know, Tom, I know you have talked about this openly and stuff as far as doing whatever you need to do in order to pay your rent. You know, people joke in different industries about talking about Maslow hierarchy of needs, but this is a perfect example of where that really takes precedent. Food, shelter, water, that's first and foremost important. So if you are unable to pay your rent, you might need to go do something that you don't want to normally do. Get a job as an Amazon driver or in a warehouse. You know, there are opportunities out there that aren't necessarily shiny and enjoyable and exciting, but might help get you through this short-term aspect. And I think if that's what you need to do, that's okay, and you should do it. There shouldn't be any, like, don't feel bad about that. Like I knew somebody once said that they didn't work even though they probably needed to because the only jobs available to them they felt were beneath them. So I remember hearing that, and I just remember being like, "What? How could you ever feel that there's any job that is beneath you? Like, get off your high horse." Secondly, I would say that the meeting industry will never go away. That there will be a time that we will be able to get back together. I don't know when that is, hopefully sooner than later, but I don't think we'll ever be able to replace human interaction, physical human interaction in the same physical presence. When we get back to that point, I don't know. Nobody knows. We can continue to try and push the envelope and hope that those things come back sooner than later. And then the other last thing I would say is we hear this a lot, that comparison is the theft of joy. And one of the things I think I've learned is that's not 100% true. That's only half true. It should say upward comparison is the theft of joy, whereas downward comparison is often a catalyst for gratitude. And so if you're sitting around and maybe you are okay financially, meaning you're not worried because your partner or someone else in your family is bringing home enough money to cover the rent for this time frame, you know, find an opportunity to go serve in some capacity, because that comparison maybe will remind you of just how grateful you should be for the things that you do have.
Wow, that's a powerful way. That is a powerful way to end what has been a fabulous episode. Judson, thank you so much for being with us here on the Webinar Talk Show.
Wow.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Again, not surprised, but still blown away. Fantastic episode for kicking off this week. And then Wednesday, we get to have a wine tasting. We're going to do some day drinking on the Webinar Talk Show with Lori Forster, who is a certified sommelier, but also a professional speaker, talking about how to create opportunities to make your people feel valued, maybe through a virtual wine tasting. So that's going to be on Wednesday. If people want to know more about what we do, Tom, where would they find us?
They can find us at webinartalkshow.com. And they can also find us on Facebook and watch all of these episodes live Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 Central by going to webinartalkshow.live. We'll redirect you right into Facebook. So please keep watching these shows. I think Judson was a perfect example of the fact that you can get great information through interviews. You don't have to always just have talking heads over PowerPoint.
And in fact, we would argue you should rarely have talking heads over PowerPoint. Judson, thank you so much again for joining us. What a great way to kick off the week. Everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Little dance moves going on there as he goes off.